The Black Hawk touched down at FOB Thunder just as dawn cracked over the Hindu Kush, painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and blood. Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Webb watched from the sandbag perimeter as the rotors kicked up a storm of Afghan dust, the familiar whine of the engines cutting through the morning call to prayer echoing from a distant village. A figure emerged from the helicopter's side door, and Webb squinted against the debris cloud. The silhouette carried a long rifle case with the easy familiarity of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. As the dust settled, he saw her clearly, a woman in desert combat utilities, moving across the landing zone with the measured stride of someone who had been downrange before. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just quiet purpose. Senior Chief Kyle Brennan appeared at Webb's shoulder, flanked by Chief Petty Officer Mills and Petty Officer First Class Reyes. Brennan's jaw was already tight, his eyes tracking the approaching figure with the kind of assessment that rarely ended in approval. "Well," Brennan said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "who is she here to photograph for the recruitment posters?" Mills laughed. Reyes stayed silent, but his smirk said enough. The woman stopped 3 feet from Brennan and set down her rifle case. "Staff Sergeant Elena Vance, United States Marine Corps," she said. Her voice carried no defensiveness, no eagerness to prove anything. "I am your attached sniper for Operation Talon Strike." Brennan made a show of reading the orders she handed him. His eyebrows climbed his forehead when he reached a particular line. He turned to Mills with theatrical disbelief. "Her call sign is Razor-Falcon." He said the words like they were a joke someone had told him twice. What kind of reservist fantasy camp hands out call signs like that? Mills suggested maybe she got it from a video game. One of those shooter games where everyone thinks they are an operator. Vance said nothing. She simply waited, her expression neutral, her hands loose at her sides. Webb noticed her eyes were not fixed on Brennan. They were scanning the FOB's perimeter, cataloging sight lines and defensive positions with the automatic reflex of someone who had learned to always know where the threats might come from. Lieutenant Commander David Chun arrived at a jog, his rank insignia catching the early light. He inserted himself between Brennan and Vance with the practiced ease of an officer who had defused 100 small tensions. "Gentlemen, this is Staff Sergeant Vance. She will be attached to our element for the duration of Talon Strike." He paused, then added with pointed emphasis, "Her qualification scores at Quantico are the highest they have recorded in 6 years." Brennan's expression did not change. "Paper scores do not mean anything when rounds are coming at you," he said. "Sir." Chen either did not hear the insubordination or chose to ignore it. He assigned Webb to escort Vance to her quarters and departed with Brennan toward the Tactical Operations Center. Webb watched them go, noting how Brennan's shoulders remained rigid with disapproval. "This way, Staff Sergeant," Webb said. They walked in silence across the FOB, past motor pools and ammunition points, and the ever-present blast barriers that defined life in a combat zone. Webb found himself glancing at Vance's rifle case, wondering what custom work lay inside. Scout snipers were particular about their weapons the way surgeons were particular about their scalpels. "Your call sign," he finally said. "Razor-Falcon. Where did that come from?" Vance's pace did not slow. "Helmand Province," she said. That was all. Webb wanted to press further. Call signs were earned through stories, usually embarrassing ones. But something in her tone suggested Helmand had not been embarrassing. It had been something else entirely. They reached the female quarters, a converted shipping container positioned at the FOB's eastern edge, as far from the main facilities as geography allowed. Webb felt a flicker of discomfort at the obvious segregation, but Vance entered without comment, setting her rifle case on the narrow cot with familiar efficiency. "Chow is at 0600, Webb said. "Mission brief at 0800 in the TOC. Vance nodded once. "Thank you, Petty Officer." Webb hesitated at the door. "For what it is worth," he said, "not everyone feels the way the senior chief does." Vance looked at him, then really looked, and Webb saw something in her eyes that made him feel very young. "It does not matter how they feel," she said. "It matters what happens when we are out there." She turned to the container's small window, her gaze finding the mountain peaks that rose like broken teeth against the brightening sky. Somewhere out there, beyond those ridges, their target was waiting. And soon enough, everyone's feelings would become irrelevant. Now I have a question for you. Where are you watching this from right now? What mountains can you see from where you live, or what landscape stretches out beyond your window? Because this story begins in the shadow of peaks that would soon witness history, and I am curious what view you are bringing to it. Drop your location in the comments while we continue, because what happens next in those Afghan mountains changed everything for the men who mocked her. Webb walked back toward the team's barracks with a strange sensation that he had just met someone who would matter. He did not know yet how right he was. None of them did. Elena entered the Tactical Operations Center at 0755, 5 minutes before the briefing was scheduled to begin. 12 SEALs were already seated in folding chairs arranged in a rough semicircle around the central planning table. Every seat was taken except one, a metal chair in the far back corner, positioned where its occupant would have to crane their neck to see the maps and imagery spread across the table. She took the seat without comment. The room smelled of coffee and gun oil and the particular staleness of air that had been recycled through too many lungs. Brennan sat in the front row, Mills and Reyes flanking him like lieutenants attending their general. None of them turned when she entered. None of them acknowledged her presence at all. Lieutenant Commander Chun arrived at 800 exactly and launched into the briefing without preamble. "Gentlemen," he said, and then, after a pause that might have been accidental, "Staff Sergeant, Operation Talon Strike is a go. Our target is Malik Hassan, Taliban regional commander responsible for the attacks on FOB's Morrison, Kingsley, and our own Thunder in the past 4 months. 18 Americans dead. Hassan has been located in a village called Darwan, 40 kilometers northeast, deep in hostile territory." Chun tapped a satellite image pinned to the board. "Insertion will be by Black Hawk, 2 birds, landing in this dry riverbed 3 kilometers south of the village. From there we move on foot under cover of darkness, establish overwatch positions before dawn, and execute the capture or kill mission at first light. Extraction will be on foot through Kandak Valley to a secondary LZ here." He traced the route with his finger. Questions so far? There were none. The SEALs had done this dance before. Elena studied the terrain imagery from her poor angle, already calculating elevations and sight lines in her head. Chun turned to Reyes. "Walk us through the Overwatch plan." Reyes stood with the casual confidence of a man who had never been questioned in this room. "I will set up here," he said, pointing to a ridge northwest of the village. "My spotter and I will have eyes on the primary compound and the northern approach. Effective range on all likely engagement zones. Standard counter-sniper protocol." Elena waited for him to continue. He did not. His plan covered himself and his spotter. No mention of a second sniper team. No mention of her at all. Chun frowned slightly. "And where does our attached Marine sniper fit into this configuration?" Brennan answered before Reyes could. "She will remain with the main assault element, sir. For safety. Village clearing is close quarters work. Having an extra rifle in the stack makes more sense than spreading our shooters thin." Elena felt her jaw tighten. Spreading shooters thin, as if she were a liability to be managed rather than an asset to be deployed. She forced her expression to remain neutral, her hands still in her lap. She had learned long ago that protesting in moments like these only gave them ammunition. Chin glanced in her direction, perhaps hoping she would object, perhaps relieved when she did not. He moved on to infiltration timing and communication protocols. Elena memorized every detail while silently cataloging the gaps in their plan. The briefing ended at 0900. The SEALs filed out in clusters, conversations resuming as if they had never paused. Elena waited until the room had nearly emptied, then approached Chun as he gathered his materials. "Sir," she said quietly. "A moment." Chun looked up. His expression suggested he already knew what was coming. "Go ahead, Staff Sergeant. The Overwatch plan has a significant blind spot." Elena kept her voice low, professional. "Reyes will have excellent coverage on the northern and western approaches, but the eastern slope of the valley is completely unobserved. If Hassan has reinforcements positioned in that direction, they could flank the assault element with no warning. Chen's eyes moved to the map, tracing the terrain she described. He was quiet for a long moment. Senior Chief Brennan knows his team's capabilities, he finally said. If he believes a single Overwatch position is sufficient, I trust his judgment. Sir, that judgment puts the entire element at risk. I have identified 3 elevated positions on the eastern ridge that would extend our coverage by 800 meters and eliminate the blind spot entirely. Chun sighed, the sound of a man caught between competing pressures. I appreciate your input, Staff Sergeant, but this is Brennan's operation. His team, his call. He paused, then added with something that might have been sympathy. You will have your chance to prove yourself out there, just not in the way you expected. Elena nodded once, the gesture carrying no agreement, only acknowledgement. She requested permission to study the terrain maps independently. Chen granted it, perhaps grateful to end the conversation. She spent the next 4 hours in the map room, alone with topographical data and satellite imagery and the quiet hum of the air conditioning unit. Her fingers traced contour lines while her mind built 3-dimensional models of the terrain. She identified her 3 positions on the eastern ridge: primary, secondary, fallback. She calculated ranges to every likely engagement zone in the village. She noted wind patterns based on vegetation movement in the satellite photos. None of it would matter if they kept her in the assault stack. But she prepared anyway, because preparation was the only variable she could control. Evening came slowly to FOB Thunder. Elena returned to her quarters as the sun bled red across the mountains, her mind still running through contingencies and calculations. She pushed open the container door and stopped. Her rifle case was gone. The space where she had left it, centered precisely on her cot, was empty. Her stomach dropped even as her training kicked in, scanning the small room for any other disturbances. Nothing else had been touched, just the rifle. She found it 20 minutes later in the motor pool, leaning against a stack of spare tires next to a row of armored vehicles. Mills was there with 2 other SEALs, performing maintenance on a Humvee that did not appear to need maintenance. Figured you'd want to be closer to the vehicles, Mills said without looking up, since that is where you will be spending the operation anyway. Guarding the gear. The 2 SEALs laughed. Elena picked up her rifle case, checked the latches, verified the contents were undisturbed. She walked away without a word. Behind her, Mills called out, "Sweet dreams, Razor-Falcon." More laughter. Elena kept walking. Word were wind. What mattered was what happened when they were out there in the mountains, when lives hung on the steadiness of a trigger finger. She would be ready, whether they wanted her to be or not. The Blackhawks lifted off from FOB Thunder at 0200, their rotors beating the night air into submission as they climbed above the perimeter lights and banked northeast toward the mountains. Webb sat with his back against the vibrating fuselage, watching the FOB shrink to a cluster of dim lights in the darkness below. Elena Vance sat directly across from him, her rifle case secured between her boots. Senior Chief Brennan occupied the seat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, yet he had positioned his body at an angle that made it physically impossible to make eye contact with her without turning completely around. He was running his team through extraction protocols, his voice cutting through the rotor noise with practice projection. "Primary LZ is compromised. What is your move?" Brennan shouted. "Mills." "Secondary LZ, grid reference 479er, Mills responded. "Rally point is the rock formation we designated checkpoint Alpha." Brennan nodded and moved to the next man. "Reyes, counter-sniper protocol if we take fire during exfil." Reyes answered without hesitation, his words automatic, rehearsed. The drill continued down the line, each SEAL responding with crisp certainty. Brennan never once directed a question to Elena. She might as well have been cargo. Webb found himself watching her instead of listening to the familiar protocols. She checked her rifle 3 times during the first hour of flight. Once when they reached cruising altitude, once when turbulence shook the bird over a mountain pass, once when they began their descent toward the insertion point. Each time her movements were identical, methodical, the muscle memory of ritual rather than the fidgeting of nerves. Her hands never trembled. Her eyes never darted. She was the only person on the helicopter who was not talking, not joking, not burning off the pre-mission tension that made other operators chatty or restless. Webb realized with sudden clarity that she was the calmest person in the aircraft. The co-pilot's voice crackled through the headsets. Possible enemy radio chatter on the approach corridor. Recommend course adjustment. Brennan leaned forward, consulting with the pilot for 30 seconds before making his decision. We shift insertion 2 clicks east. Drier riverbed. Less exposure on approach. He relayed the new coordinates and settled back into his seat. Elena's expression did not change, but Webb saw something flicker behind her eyes. He remembered her mentioning eastern ridge positions during the briefing. Moving the insertion point east would put them further from whatever overwatch angle she had identified. Whether Brennan knew this and did not care, or simply had not considered her input worth remembering, the result was the same. No one asked her opinion. No one even looked in her direction. The helicopters dropped through the darkness like stones, flaring hard at the last moment to touch down in a dry riverbed carved between 2 ridge lines. The SEALs poured out in practiced sequence, establishing a security perimeter while the birds lifted off and disappeared back toward the FOB. Within 60 seconds, the sound of rotors faded to nothing, leaving only the whisper of wind through the valley and the crunch of boots on gravel. Brennan organized the patrol formation with hand signals, placing his most experienced operators on point and rear security. Elena was positioned in the center of the column, surrounded on all sides by SEALs. It was the protected position, the spot reserved for casualties being evacuated or non-combatants being escorted through hostile territory. The message was clear. She was something to be protected, not someone to be relied upon. Elena accepted the position without protest. She shouldered her rifle and moved when the column moved, her steps silent on the rocky terrain, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the night vision green world of her optics. They covered 2 kilometers in 40 minutes, navigating by terrain features and GPS, pausing twice when Point Man signaled possible movement ahead. Both times the movement resolved into nothing. An animal, a shadow, the paranoia that lived in every operator's hindsight. The valley narrowed as they climbed, funneling them toward a ridgeline that would overlook the target village of Darwan. Reyes split off with his spotter as they reached the high ground, moving to establish his overwatch position on a rocky outcropping that commanded views to the north and west. Elena watched him go, noting his angle of coverage, calculating what he could see and what he could not. The eastern slope was completely exposed, exactly as she had predicted. She considered speaking up, considered approaching Brennan, pointing out the gap in their defensive posture, recommending that she take a position on the eastern ridge to cover the blind spot. But she had already made that recommendation in the TOC to Chun, and it had been dismissed. These men had made their position clear. Her input was not wanted. Her expertise was not trusted. She was here because someone above their pay grade had ordered it, and they would tolerate her presence while ignoring her capabilities. She said nothing. Brennan gathered the assault element in a shallow depression below the ridgeline, their bodies pressed against the cold rock to minimize their silhouettes against the starlit sky. They would hold here until 0430, he announced. First light assault. Radio silence unless contact. The SEALs settled into the particular stillness of operators waiting for violence. Some closed their eyes, catching whatever fragments of rest they could. Others stared at the darkness, running through scenarios in their heads. Brennan spoke quietly with Mills, their conversation too low for Elena to hear. She moved 50 meters along the ridge, finding a natural depression in the rock that offered cover and a clear line of sight to the east. She extended her rifle's bipod, settled into a prone position, and pressed her eye to the scope. The eastern approach stretched out before her in shades of green and black, a jumbled landscape of boulders and scrub brush and shadows that could hide anything. She scanned methodically, quadrant by quadrant, searching for the glint of metal or the heat signature of a body, or any of the dozen small tells that separated an empty hillside from an ambush waiting to happen. Nothing yet. The eastern ridge was quiet. But dawn was still 2 hours away, and Elena had learned in Hellman that the most dangerous moments were always the ones just before the light changed. She settled deeper into her position, controlled her breathing, and watched the darkness with the patience of a woman who knew exactly what was coming. They just did not know it yet. 04:15. The darkness had softened to a deep gray, the first hint of dawn bleeding over the eastern peaks. Webb lay prone on the ridgeline, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the village of Darwan emerge from shadow below. Reyes was the first to break radio silence. Movement in the village, he reported. 3 armed males, moving between structures near the central compound. Weapons visible. Brennan's response came immediately. Copy. All elements, stand by for assault. Green light in 60 seconds. Webb felt his pulse quicken. Beside him, 3 other SEALs rose to crouches, checking weapons and gear with the automatic efficiency of men who had done this 100 times. 50 meters away, Elena remained motionless in her prone position, her eye never leaving her scope. Assault element, you are green, Brennan announced. Execute. The assault team began their descent toward the village, 8 shadows flowing down the hillside with predatory grace. Webb tracked their movement through his binoculars, watching them leapfrog from cover to cover, closing the distance in practice bounds. Elena tracked them too, but her attention kept drifting east. Something had caught her eye 20 minutes ago, a glint on the mountainside, too brief to confirm, too persistent in her memory to dismiss. She swept her scope across the eastern ridge, searching. There, 1,800 meters out, a flash of reflected light where no reflection should exist. She studied the position, watching for movement, and saw it, the slight shift of a human silhouette repositioning behind a rock formation. She keyed her radio. Razor-Falcon to actual. Possible enemy observation post, Eastern Ridge, grid reference 472-938. Range approximately 1,800 meters. Recommend investigation. Static. Then Brennan's voice, tight with irritation. Negative, Razor-Falcon. Maintain radio silence unless you have imminent threat. We are 30 seconds from breach. Elena's jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to point out that an observation post could mean reinforcements, could mean they were walking into a prepared ambush. But the radio discipline was clear, and Brennan had made his position clearer. She was not part of his team. Her observations were not wanted. She returned to watching the eastern ridge. The single glint had become 2, then 3. Below, the assault element reached the village perimeter. Webb watched Brennan's team stack on the entrance to the primary compound, a mud brick structure with a rusted metal door. Hand signals flashed. The breacher moved forward with a shotgun. The door blew inward. The SEALs poured through. Gunfire erupted immediately, the distinctive crack of rifles mixing with the deeper bark of the enemy's AK-47s. Webb's stomach dropped. Hassan's security detail had been waiting. The intelligence was compromised. Contact, contact, Brennan shouted into the radio. Multiple hostiles in the primary compound. We are engaged. Webb watched muzzle flashes strobe inside the compound, casting flickering shadows through windows and doorways. The sounds of combat rolled up the hillside, gunfire, shouting, the crump of a grenade detonating somewhere inside. Reyes, Brennan called. I need fire on the central courtyard. 3 hostiles using the well for cover. Reyes adjusted his position, acquiring targets through his scope. His rifle cracked 3 times in rapid succession. 2 of the figures by the well dropped. The third scrambled for the nearest building and disappeared through a doorway. 2 down, Reyes reported. Third target entered structure Delta. Elena barely heard the exchange. Her attention was fixed on the eastern mountainside, where the situation had changed dramatically. The single observation post had multiplied. She counted 6 distinct positions now, spread across a 200-meter front, and at least 2 of them were setting up what looked like precision rifles on bipods. This was not an observation post. This was a sniper nest. She keyed her radio again. Razor-Falcon to actual. Enemy sniper element establishing on Eastern Ridge. 6 shooters confirmed, 2 with precision rifles. Range approximately 2,000 meters. Request permission to engage. Brennan's response came between bursts of gunfire. Negative, Razor-Falcon. We are in contact here. Hold your position and stop clogging the net. Mills added his voice a moment later. We have got this handled. Stay off the radio. Elena stared at her scope in disbelief. They were dismissing her again, even now, even with enemy snipers setting up to kill them. She considered engaging without permission, taking the shots she knew she could make, but doing so would mean disobeying a direct order in combat. It could end her career. It could land her in front of a court-martial. She held her fire. She watched the enemy snipers settle into their positions, and she waited for what she knew was coming. It came 45 seconds later. The first enemy sniper round cracked across the village like a thunderbolt, the supersonic snap reaching the ridgeline a full second before the distant report of the rifle. The bullet impacted the wall 3 feet from Petty Officer Collins, spraying him with rock fragments and dust. He went down screaming, hands clutching his face. Sniper, someone shouted. Eastern Ridge. Now Brennan believed her. Reyes, Brennan barked. Engage that sniper position. Eastern Ridge, 2,000 meters. Reyes swung his rifle east, searching for targets. His scope swept across the mountainside, hunting for the shooters Elena had reported minutes ago. But his position on the northwestern outcropping had been chosen for coverage of the village, not the eastern approaches. The angle was wrong. A massive boulder formation blocked his line of sight to exactly where the enemy had set up. I have no shot, Reyes reported, frustration bleeding through his professional tone. Terrain is blocking my angle. I cannot see them from here. Another enemy round cracked overhead, closer this time. Then another. The sniper nest had found its range. Brennan's voice came through the radio, stripped of its earlier dismissiveness, carrying now only the urgent desperation of a man watching his operation fall apart. Razor-Falcon. He paused, and Elena heard him swallow his pride in that brief silence. Can you see them? She was already adjusting her scope, already calculating windage and elevation, already placing her crosshairs on the chest of the nearest enemy shooter. Affirmative, she said. I have eyes on all 6. The second enemy sniper round found flesh. Petty Officer First Class Danny Kowalski was crossing the courtyard when it hit him, driving through his shoulder and spinning him into the dust. He landed on his back in the open, 30 meters from the nearest cover, and began to scream. Kowalski is down, someone shouted. Kowalski is hit. Brennan pressed himself against the mud brick wall, his mind racing through options that were evaporating by the second. 2 of his men broke from cover, trying to reach their fallen teammate. A sniper round cracked between them, kicking up a geyser of dirt, and they dove back behind the well. We cannot reach him, Mills reported. They have the whole courtyard zeroed. Brennan felt something cold settle in his chest. He had walked his team into a kill zone. The enemy had prepared this, had positioned their snipers with perfect angles on the village while his own Overwatch sat useless on the wrong ridge. And the one person who had warned him, the one person who had seen this coming, was the same person he had spent 3 days dismissing as a publicity stunt. He keyed his radio. Razor-Falcon. Full report on enemy positions. Elena's voice came back immediately, steady as stone. 6 shooters. 2 precision rifles for security with AKs. They are spread across a 200-meter front on the eastern ridge. Range to my position is 20 to 100 meters. The precision shooters are the priority targets. They're the ones making accurate shots. 20 to 100 meters. Brennan had been shooting his entire adult life. He knew what that distance meant. At 20 to 100 meters, a bullet would be in the air for nearly 3 seconds. Wind could push it dozens of feet off target. The curve of the earth became a factor. It was not a shot. It was applied mathematics combined with prayer. Reyes, Brennan called. Can you relocate to get an angle on that position? Reyes responded with frustration in his voice. I can move, but it will take me 15 minutes to find a new position with clear sight lines. Maybe longer. Brennan looked at Kowalski, writhing in the dirt, his screams weakening as shock began to set in. The team medic was pinned behind a low wall, unable to cross the courtyard without drawing fire. 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours. Another round snapped overhead, close enough that Brennan felt the pressure wave against his cheek. These enemy snipers knew what they were doing. They were walking their shots closer with each attempt, bracketing the seals like artillery. On the ridgeline above the village, Webb had crawled to a position where he could see Elena without disturbing her concentration. What he witnessed stopped his breath. She lay motionless behind her rifle, her body forming a perfect line from shoulder to stock to barrel. Her breathing had slowed to something almost imperceptible, each exhale lasting seconds longer than seemed natural. Her finger rested on the trigger guard, not the trigger itself, waiting with inhuman patience for the moment when all variables would align. Webb had seen snipers work before. He had never seen anything like this. She was not preparing to take a shot. She was becoming part of the weapon, merging her consciousness with the physics of the bullet she was about to send across 2 kilometers of Afghan mountainside. In the village below, Kowalski had stopped screaming. The silence was worse. "Brennan," Mills called. "Kowalski is not moving. We need to get to him now." Brennan knew the geometry. He understood it with the clarity of a man facing his own failures. His overwatch was useless. His team was pinned. His wounded man was bleeding out in the open. And the only person who could change any of that was a Marine Corps sniper he had mocked, excluded, and ignored since the moment she stepped off the helicopter. Another enemy round impacted the wall 6 inches from his head. Mud brick exploded across his face, filling his eyes with grit and dust. He wiped his vision clear and made the only decision left to him. "Razor-Falcon," he said into the radio. His voice carried none of the contempt it had held for 3 days, only the raw desperation of a leader watching his men die. "You're cleared hot. Engage enemy sniper position." There was a pause. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then Elena's voice, calm as a surgeon announcing an incision. "Engaging." Webb watched her finger move from the trigger guard to the trigger itself. Her breathing stopped entirely. The world seemed to contract around her, the mountains and the sky and the distant enemy all funneling down to a single point of focus. She fired. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The muzzle blast echoed across the valley. And somewhere out there, 2,200 meters away, a bullet began its 3-second journey toward a man who did not know he was already dead. Webb counted in his head. 1, 2, 3. On the eastern ridge, one of the enemy precision shooters jerked backward and lay still. Elena was already adjusting for the second target. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, small corrections measured in fractions of degrees. Another breath held. Another trigger pull. Another 3-second wait. The second precision shooter dropped. In the village courtyard, the suppressive fire from the eastern ridge faltered. The 4 security shooters had just watched their 2 best marksmen die from bullets they never saw coming, fired by a shooter they could not locate. Panic rippled through their positions. Elena did not give them time to recover. She shifted to the security element, engaging each target as they broke cover or tried to reposition. Her rifle cracked 4 more times in the span of 90 seconds. 4 more bodies collapsed on the distant mountainside. Silence rolled across the valley. Brennan stared at the eastern ridge through his binoculars, searching for movement, finding none. 6 enemy fighters had established a perfect ambush position. 6 enemy fighters were now dead, and the woman who killed them was still lying motionless on the ridgeline above him, her eye pressed to her scope, scanning for additional threats. "Razor-Falcon," he said into the radio. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Smaller somehow. Confirm enemy status." 6 enemy Kia, Elena responded. "Eastern sniper position neutralized." Then her voice changed, sharpening with new urgency. "Be advised, I have eyes on a 7-shooter. Single hostile, repositioning on a secondary ridge. Range approximately 2,600 meters. He is moving to cover your extraction route." Brennan's blood went cold. 2,600 meters. That was not a sniper shot. That was a world record attempt. That was impossible. Can you reach him? He asked. The pause before Elena answered lasted only a second, but it contained calculations that would have taken most shooters an hour to complete. Working it, she said. Stand by. 2,600 meters. Elena let the number settle into her mind, not as an obstacle, but as a problem to be solved. At this distance, the bullet would drop over 200 feet during its flight. It would curve sideways with the rotation of the Earth. It would pass through at least 3 distinct layers of wind, each potentially blowing in a different direction at a different speed. The target would be little more than a smudge in her scope, a collection of pixels that might shift position in the 3.5 seconds between trigger pull and impact. This was not marksmanship. This was applied physics. This was predicting where the universe would place a small piece of copper and lead after it traveled nearly 2 miles through atmosphere. She began her calculations. Elevation first. Her rifle was zeroed for 800 meters. At 2,600, she would need to dial in over 40 minutes of angle, tilting her barrel skyward at an angle that would look absurd to anyone who did not understand external ballistics. She made the adjustment, her fingers moving the turret with micrometer precision. When next? She studied the vegetation between her position and the target, reading the movement of scrub brush and grass at multiple distances. The wind was coming from the northwest at her position, perhaps 8 miles per hour, but halfway to the target, the terrain channeled through a narrow valley that would accelerate the flow. And at the target's elevation, 1,000 feet above her, the wind would be different again. She estimated, calculated, adjusted. Coriolis effect. At this range, the Earth's rotation would push the bullet approximately 8 inches to the right during its flight. Most shooters never considered this factor. Most shooters never took shots where it mattered. Air density, temperature, humidity, the specific ballistic coefficient of the hand-loaded ammunition she had prepared herself. Each round weighed and measured to tolerances most factories could not match. She fed each variable into the equation building in her mind, a complex calculation that would have taken a computer seconds to complete. She did it in her head, the way she had trained herself to do it through thousands of hours of practice, because in combat there was no time to consult charts or calculators. Webb had crawled closer, positioning himself where he could observe without disturbing her. He barely breathed, afraid that any movement might break whatever trance she had entered. Her stillness was absolute, her body fused with the rifle into a single organic machine designed for one purpose. In the village below, urgent voices crackled through the radio. Kowalski is unresponsive. We need to move him now. The medic's voice followed. I cannot cross the courtyard until that shooter is down. If he has angle on our extraction route, we're going to lose more people trying to get Danny out. Brennan's response was tight, with controlled panic. Razor-Falcon, status on that 7th target. Elena did not answer. She was beyond words now, beyond anything except the scope and the target and the invisible thread she was about to draw between them. She found a shooter in her optics, a prone figure nestled behind a rock formation on a ridge that seemed impossibly far away. He was setting up his own rifle, preparing to engage the SEALs when they attempted to extract their wounded. He had no idea he was already in someone's crosshairs. He had no idea that his life now depended on factors he could not see or control. Elena made her final adjustment, a fraction of a degree. The difference between a hit and a miss at this distance could be measured in the width of a human hair. She exhaled slowly, letting her lungs empty completely. Her heart rate dropped, each beat coming slower than the last, her body entering the state of profound calm that only came in moments like this. The world contracted until nothing existed except the circle of her scope and the tiny figure at its center. She held her breath. Her finger moved from the guard to the trigger. She felt the resistance, the precise weight of the pull she had tuned herself over years of practice. She fired. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, familiar as a handshake. The muzzle blast echoed across the valley, rolling off the mountainsides in diminishing waves. And somewhere out there, a bullet began its journey. 1 second. The bullet climbed, fighting gravity, riding the initial velocity that would carry it further than almost any rifle shot in combat history. 2 seconds. It reached its apex and began to fall, curving downward in a parabolic arc that would have looked like failure to anyone who did not understand the mathematics. The wind pushed it sideways, first one direction, then another as it passed through different air currents. 3 seconds. It was falling faster now, gravity accelerating its descent. The Earth had rotated slightly beneath it. The target had not moved. 3.5 seconds. The distant figure jerked once and lay still. Webb released a breath he did not remember holding. He had seen combat. He had seen extraordinary things done by extraordinary operators. He had never seen anything like what he just witnessed. A shot taken at a range most snipers would call impossible under combat conditions, with lives hanging in the balance. And she had made it look like routine. Elena chambered another round, her movements automatic, and tracked the target position for a full 10 seconds. No movement, no signs of life. She shifted her scope to scan the surrounding terrain, searching for any additional threats. Razor-Falcon to actual, she said into her radio. Her voice carried no triumph, no excitement, just the flat professional tone of someone completing a task. 7th target neutralized. Range confirmed 26-17 meters. Extraction route is clear. Silence on the radio. Then Brennan's voice, and Webb could hear something in it that had not been there before. Something that sounded almost like awe. Solid copy, Razor-Falcon. He paused, and when he spoke again, the words seemed to cost him something. That is solid copy. Good shooting. Elena did not respond. Compliments were irrelevant. Only the mission mattered. Only the men below who still needed to get out alive. She settled back behind her scope, scanning the mountainsides, watching for any new threats that might emerge. The enemy had lost 7 fighters in under 3 minutes to a shooter they never saw. If there were more of them out there, they would be cautious now. They would be afraid. Good, Elena thought. Let them be afraid. In the village courtyard, the medic finally broke cover and sprinted toward Kowalski's motionless form. No shots came for the eastern ridges. The path was clear, because Elena Vance had made it clear. The medic reached Kowalski in seconds, sliding to his knees beside the motionless form and immediately pressing his hands against the wound. Alive, he called out. Pulse is weak, but he is alive. I need to stabilize him before we move. Brennan was already reorganizing his team, pulling security while the medic worked. His movements were efficient, but something in his posture had changed. The rigid certainty that had defined him since Elena stepped off the helicopter had cracked, replaced by something more cautious, more humble. We move in 5 minutes, Brennan announced. Extraction route is clear. He paused, then added, Razor-Falcon confirmed. No one questioned the assessment. No one made jokes about call signs or recruitment posters. The eastern ridges were littered with bodies because of Elena Vance, and every man in that village understood what that meant. Webb helped break down their position on the ridgeline, gathering equipment and erasing signs of their presence. Elena remained behind her rifle until the last possible moment, her scope sweeping the mountainsides in slow, methodical arcs. Only when Brennan called for the Overwatch element to collapse did she finally rise, slinging her rifle across her back in a single, fluid motion. They moved out in tactical formation, threading through the valley toward the secondary extraction point. This time, Elena was not in the center of the column. Webb noticed that Brennan had positioned her near the front, just behind the point man, where her optics could scan the terrain ahead. It was a small change. It meant everything. The first kilometer passed in tense silence. Kowalski was being carried on an improvised stretcher, for SEALs rotating the duty while the medic walked alongside monitoring his vitals. His breathing had stabilized, but his face was pale as chalk, his body burning through its reserves to keep him alive. 2 kilometers from the extraction point, the point man raised a fist. Everyone froze. Movement ahead, he whispered into the radio. Multiple contacts. Looks like a patrol. Brennan moved forward in a crouch, joining Elena and the point man behind a cluster of boulders. He raised his binoculars and studied the terrain ahead. A dry stream bed cut across their path, and moving along, it was a group of armed men. 8 fighters, Taliban by their dress and weapons, heading toward the village they had just left. Reinforcements, Brennan muttered, coming to help their friends. The patrol was 400 meters out, moving perpendicular to the SEAL position. In 60 seconds, they would pass directly across the extraction route. If the SEALs waited, they might slip by undetected, or the patrol might spot their tracks, or Kowalski might not have 60 seconds to spare. Elena studied the patrol through her scope. 8 targets spread across a 40-meter front. The terrain offered her clear sight lines from 600 meters down to 300 as they moved through the stream bed. She could engage before they reached effective range of a SEAL position. She looked at Brennan. His jaw was tight, his eyes calculating odds and risks and the lives that hung on his decision. 3 days ago, he would not have considered her input. 3 days ago, he would have planned an ambush using his own team, his own methods, his own people. "Can you take them?" he asked. For words. No mockery, no condescension. Just a leader asking a subordinate if she could accomplish a task. "I can thin them significantly before they reach cover," Elena replied. For confirmed. "Maybe 5. The rest will scatter." Brennan nodded once. "Do it." Elena settled into a prone position behind the boulder, extending her bipod and pressing her cheek to the stock. The patrol was moving steadily, unaware that death was watching them through a rifle scope. She took the first shot at 600 meters. The lead fighter dropped without a sound. Before the others could react, she had shifted to the second target. Another crack of the rifle. Another body falling. The patrol scattered, diving for cover, but the stream bed offered little protection from an elevated shooter. Elena tracked a third fighter as he sprinted for a boulder and dropped him mid-stride. A fourth tried to return fire blindly in her direction. She put a round through his chest before he could complete his first burst. The remaining 4 broke and ran, abandoning their weapons, fleeing back the way they had come. Elena tracked them through her scope but held her fire. They were no longer a threat. They were messengers now, carrying word back to whoever had sent them that something terrible waited in these mountains. Brennan watched the survivors disappear around a bend in the stream bed. "For down," he said quietly. 90 seconds. Elena ejected her magazine and replaced it with a fresh one. She did not respond. The compliment, if that was what it was, did not require acknowledgement. They moved out immediately, crossing the stream bed and continuing toward the extraction point. The pace increased now, Kowalski stretcher-bearers moving at a jog despite the rough terrain. Every minute mattered. Elena found herself at the front of the column, no longer protected but protecting. Her scope swept every ridgeline, every shadow, every fold in the terrain that might conceal a threat. The SEALs behind her moved with visible confidence, trusting her eyes to see what they could not. The extraction point appeared ahead, a flat stretch of ground between 2 ridges, large enough for helicopters to land. Brennan called a halt and began positioning his team in a defensive perimeter. "Razor-Falcon," he said, "take the high ground. Best sight lines you can find." Elena nodded and moved to a rocky outcropping that overlooked the landing zone. It was the most exposed position, the most important position, the place where the best shooter belonged. Brennan keyed his radio to call for extraction. The helicopters were 7 minutes out. 7 minutes later, the Black Hawks appeared over the southern ridge, their rotors beating the air into submission. They flared hard and touched down in a storm of dust and noise. The team loaded quickly, Kowalski's stretcher sliding into the first bird while the operators piled in around him. Elena was the last one aboard. She had held her position until everyone else was secure, her rifle covering the perimeter until the moment she turned and sprinted for the helicopter. Hands reached out to pull her inside as the bird lifted off, the ground falling away beneath them. Webb sat across from her as they climbed into the brightening sky. She was staring out the open door at the mountains receding below, her face showing nothing. No relief, no triumph, just the quiet exhaustion of someone who had done what needed to be done. The men around her were different now. They did not look away when she glanced in their direction. They did not whisper jokes or exchange knowing smirks. They looked at her the way soldiers look at someone who has earned their place in blood and fire. She had come to them as an outsider, dismissed and mocked. She was leaving as something else entirely. The helicopter banked over the final ridge, and FOB thunder appeared below, its lights cutting harsh lines through the pre-dawn darkness. Webb watched Elena watching the approaching base, her rifle cradled across her lap like a sleeping child. Her face betrayed nothing of what she had accomplished in the past 2 hours. Brennan sat 3 seats away, his head tilted back against the fuselage, eyes closed. But Webb could tell he was not sleeping. His jaw kept tightening, releasing, tightening again. The senior chief was replaying the mission in his head. Webb knew the feeling. He was doing the same thing. The Black Hawk flared hard over the landing zone and touched down in a storm of rotor wash. Medical teams were already waiting, alerted by radio during the flight. They swarmed the helicopter before the skids had fully settled, pulling Kowalski's stretcher out and rushing it toward the surgical unit. The medic jogged alongside, shouting vitals and wound assessments to the doctors who had taken over. Brennan dismounted and stood motionless on the tarmac, watching his wounded man disappear through the medical bay doors. Mills appeared at his shoulder, started to say something, then thought better of it. The 2 men stood in silence as the rest of the team unloaded around them. Elena was the last off the helicopter. She moved past Brennan without looking at him, her rifle case in one hand, her steps carrying her directly toward the armory. No detour to the command post for immediate debrief. No lingering to receive congratulations or answer questions. Just a Marine completing post-mission protocols while the men she had saved stood in clusters on the landing zone, watching her go. Webb fell in a step beside Mills as they walked toward the team's barracks. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the hollow exhaustion that always followed combat. His hands had started to shake, the delayed reaction his body had been suppressing during the operation. Mills spoke first. 2,600 meters. His voice was flat, disbelieving. I have never even heard of anyone making a shot like that in combat. Webb said nothing. He was thinking about the moment Elena had first reported the enemy observation post, her calm voice on the radio, and how Brennan had told her to stop clogging the net. He was thinking about the rifle case moved to the motor pool, the jokes about video games and recruitment posters. Mills seemed to be thinking similar thoughts. We were wrong about her, he said quietly. It was not an apology. It was a statement of fact, spoken in the tone of a man who was only beginning to understand how wrong. In the armory, Elena secured her rifle in its designated rack and began the meticulous process of cleaning and inspection. Her hands moved through the familiar routine automatically, breaking down the weapon, examining each component, wiping away the residue of the 11 rounds she had fired. 11 shots. 11 enemies who would never threaten American forces again. She did not think about the men she had killed. She had learned long ago to separate the act from the aftermath, to compartmentalize the violence into a box that only opened when necessary. What she thought about instead was Kowalski. Whether he would survive, whether the shoulder wound had damaged anything that could not be repaired. She thought about Brennan's voice on the radio when he finally cleared her to engage. The desperation in it, the implicit admission that everything he had believed about her was wrong. She took no satisfaction in his humiliation. She had not proven herself to spite him. She had proven herself because lives depended on it. That was all that mattered. The armory door opened behind her. Webb stood in the entrance, his silhouette backlit by the fluorescent lights of the corridor. "Staff Sergeant," he said. His voice carried an uncertainty it had not held before the mission. "I wanted to say something." Elena continued cleaning her rifle. "Go ahead, petty officer." Webb stepped inside, letting the door swing closed behind him. "I watch you out there. The way you set up for that shot. The calculations you were doing in your head." He paused, struggling to find words adequate to what he had witnessed. "I have been on a lot of operations. I have never seen anything like that." Elena slid the bolt back into her rifle with a satisfying click. She turned to face him, her expression neutral but not hostile. "You saw someone doing their job," she said. "Nothing more. It was more than that." Webb held her gaze. "And the way they treated you before. The things they said. He shook his head. That was not right. I should have spoken up. Elena considered him for a long moment. The fact that he had come to her now, when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain from the gesture, told her something about his character. He was young. He had lacked the courage or the standing to challenge his superiors. But he had the conscience to recognize the failure afterward. What matters now, she said, is what you do next. She returned her rifle to its rack and closed the case. The mission is over. The debrief will be soon. What you say in that room is your choice. Webb nodded slowly. He understood what she was telling him. The after-action report would shape how this operation was remembered. The details he chose to include or exclude would determine whether Brennan's treatment of her became part of the official record. I'm going to tell them everything, he said. From the beginning. Elena picked up her rifle case and walked toward the door. Webb stepped aside to let her pass. She stopped in the doorway and looked back at him. Then make sure you tell it accurately, she said. Not to punish anyone, just so it does not happen to the next woman who gets attached to a unit that does not want her. She walked out into the corridor, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Behind her, Webb stood alone in the armory, running through the mission in his head, organizing the details he would soon put into writing. Outside, the sun was rising over FOB Thunder. The surgical lights were still on in the medical bay, where doctors fought to save Kowalski's life. And somewhere in the Tactical Operations Center, Master Chief Frank Torres was already reviewing the radio logs from Operation Talon Strike, his brow furrowing as he listened to the timestamps and transmissions that told a story the official briefing had not yet revealed. Master Chief Frank Torres had been listening to combat operations for 23 years. He knew the rhythms of a mission the way a conductor knows a symphony, the tension of insertion, the staccato of contact, the long exhale of extraction. He had heard hundreds of operations unfold through radio traffic, and he could usually predict how they would end within the first 5 minutes. Operation Talon Strike was different. He sat alone in the Tactical Operations Center, headphones pressed to his ears, replaying the recorded transmissions for the third time. The timeline troubled him. At 0419, a call sign he did not recognize had reported enemy positions on the eastern ridge. Razor-Falcon, the voice had said. Female. Calm. Professional. The response from actual had been curt. Negative. Maintain radio silence. 6 minutes later, the first enemy sniper round had impacted near the assault element. Torres paused the recording and pulled up the personnel manifest for the operation. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance, USMC, attached sniper. Call sign Razor-Falcon. He navigated to her service record and began reading. 3 combat deployments. 17 confirmed kills before tonight. Graduated top of her class at Scout Sniper School with the highest qualification scores recorded since 2019. Commendations from 2 separate battalion commanders. A note in her file indicated that her attachment to SEAL Team 7 had been made over the formal objection of Senior Chief Kyle Brennan. Torres leaned back in his chair. The picture forming in his mind was not a flattering one. He resumed the recording. The next several minutes were chaos. Reports of contact, requests for sniper support, Reyes announcing he had no angle on the eastern threat. Then Brennan's voice, stripped of its usual confidence, asking Razor-Falcon if she could see the enemy positions. Her response was immediate and precise. 6 shooters, 2 precision rifles, range 2,200 meters. Torres listened to what followed. The authorization to engage. The silence as she took her shots. The report of 6 enemy Kia. Then the 7th target, repositioning at 2,600 meters, and her calm announcement that she was working the solution. 2,600 meters. Torres had been in the Navy for over 2 decades. He knew what that distance meant. He had never heard of anyone making a confirmed combat kill at that range. The recording continued. 7th target neutralized. Range 2,617 meters. Extraction route clear. Torres removed his headphones and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he pulled up the formal objection Brennan had filed 3 weeks ago, requesting that Staff Sergeant Vance be removed from the operation. The language was professional, but the subtext was clear. Brennan did not want a female sniper attached to his team. He had cited concerns about unit cohesion and operational security. He had made no mention of her qualifications or combat record. The door to the TOC opened. Torres looked up to find Webb standing in the entrance, still wearing his combat gear, dust and exhaustion written across his face. "Petty Officer Webb," Torres said. "Come in." Webb entered hesitantly. "Master Chief, I was looking for someone to give my statement to." Torres gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit down." He studied the young SEAL's face, reading the conflict there. "Before we get to formal statements, I want to hear it from you directly. What happened out there tonight?" Webb sat. His hands were clasped between his knees, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere on the floor. For a moment, Torres thought he might refuse to speak. Then the words started coming. Webb told him about the helicopter ride, how Brennan had drilled the team on protocols without once acknowledging Vance's presence. He described her position in the patrol column, protected like a casualty rather than deployed like an asset. He recounted her first report of enemy positions and how Brennan had dismissed it. He explained the 6-minute gap between her warning and the first incoming round that nearly killed Collins. Torres listened without interrupting. His expression remained neutral, but his mind was cataloging every detail, cross-referencing it against the radio logs, building a timeline of decisions and consequences. Webb continued. He described watching Vance prepare for her shots, the inhuman stillness of her focus, the precision of her calculations. He told Torres about the 2,600-meter kill, his voice dropping almost to a whisper as he tried to convey what it had been like to witness something that should have been impossible. "She saved us," Webb said finally. "All of us. And we spent 3 days treating her like she did not belong there." Torres let the silence stretch for a moment. Then he reached into his desk and produced a formal statement form, sliding it across to Webb along with a pen. "I want you to write down everything you just told me," Torres said, "from the moment she arrived at the FOB to the moment you landed back here tonight. Every detail you can remember, every word you heard, every decision that was made." Webb picked up the pen, then hesitated. "Is Staff Sergeant Vance in trouble, Master Chief?" Torres met his eyes. "She performed her duties with exceptional proficiency under hostile fire. She saved American lives when others failed to heed her warnings." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "She is not the one who should be worried." Webb nodded slowly. He understood. He began to write. Torres returned to his headphones and resumed the recording. Somewhere in the medical bay, doctors were fighting to save Kowalski's life. Somewhere in the barracks, Brennan was replaying his decisions in the dark. And somewhere in her quarters, Elena Vance was doing what she had always done, preparing for the next mission, indifferent to whether anyone would ever acknowledge what she had accomplished. Torres intended to make sure they did. The summons came at 0900, 12 hours after the helicopters had touched down. Brennan had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the crack of enemy sniper rounds and the sound of Kowalski screaming in the courtyard. Lieutenant Commander Chen's office was a cramped space carved out of a shipping container, furnished with a metal desk and 3 folding chairs. When Brennan entered, he found Chen seated behind the desk and Master Chief Torres standing against the far wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The after-action report lay open on Chen's desk. Not the preliminary version Brennan had submitted 4 hours ago. A different document, thicker, annotated with colored tabs. "Close the door," Chen said. "Sit down." Brennan sat. The chair creaked beneath his weight. He kept his eyes forward, his posture rigid, the bearing of a man who knew he was about to face judgment. Chen did not waste time with preamble. "I am going to ask you a direct question, Senior Chief, and I expect a direct answer." He leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. "Did your personal feelings about Staff Sergeant Vance affect your tactical decisions during Operation Talon Strike?" The question hung in the air. Brennan felt Torres watching him from the corner, felt the weight of the report on the desk, felt the accumulated evidence of his failures pressing down on his shoulders. He wanted a lie. The lie was already forming in his throat, the denial that would protect his career and his reputation and everything he had built over 15 years. But Torres was looking at him with eyes that already knew everything. Webb's statement was probably in that report. The radio logs. The timeline that proved Brennan had ignored a warning that might have saved Kowalski from taking a round. The lie died before it reached his lips. "Yes, sir," Brennan said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "I did not integrate her into the tactical plan because I did not believe she belonged on this operation. I did not trust her capabilities. I was wrong." Chen nodded slowly, as if the admission confirmed something he had already suspected. He opened the report and began reading aloud. At 0419, Staff Sergeant Vance reported possible enemy observation positions on the eastern ridge. Your response was to order her to maintain radio silence unless she observed an imminent threat. He looked up. At 0425, 6 minutes later, the first enemy sniper round impacted near Petty Officer Collins. He paused. 6 minutes, Senior Chief. 6 minutes during which the enemy established firing positions that your designated overwatch could not engage. Brennan said nothing. There was nothing to say. Chun continued. Petty Officer Kowalski took a round at 0427. A round that might have been prevented if Staff Sergeant Vance's warning had been heeded and appropriate countermeasures taken. He closed the report. Danny Kowalski is currently in surgery. The doctors believe he will survive, but his career as an operator is likely over. His shoulder will never be the same. The words landed like blows. Brennan had led men into combat for 15 years. He had made hard decisions under fire. He had lost teammates before, but he had never sat in a room and been told that his own prejudice might have ended a man's career. "Here is what is going to happen," Chin said. His tone was not angry. It was something worse, disappointed. "A formal letter of reprimand will be entered into your service record. You will undergo mandatory leadership review before your next promotion board." He paused. "You should consider yourself fortunate, Senior Chief. If Kowalski had died out there, we would be having a very different conversation." Brennan swallowed hard. "Understood, sir." Chin was not finished. "There's one more thing. Staff Sergeant Vance is being submitted for a Bronze Star with Combat Distinguishing Device. Her shot data is being forwarded to Quantico for verification." He met Brennan's eyes. If confirmed, her kill at 2,600 meters will be one of the longest combat sniper shots in United States military history. Brennan absorbed this in silence. The woman he had dismissed as a publicity stunt was about to enter the record books. The woman he had excluded from tactical planning had saved his entire team. The woman whose rifle case he had allowed to be moved to the motor pool had performed under fire with a precision he had never witnessed in 2 decades of service. "Is there anything else, sir?" Brennan asked. Chen shook his head. "Dismissed." Brennan stood, saluted, and walked out of the office. The corridor outside was empty, the midday heat already building inside the metal walls of the shipping container complex. He stood there for a long moment, breathing, trying to organize the wreckage of his thoughts. Then he began walking toward the female quarters. The shipping container at the FOB's eastern edge looked the same as it had 3 days ago, when he had first watched Elena Vance step off the helicopter. He stopped at the door, raised his hand, and knocked. She opened it 5 seconds later. Her expression showed no surprise, no curiosity, no satisfaction at seeing him standing there. She simply waited, the way she had waited when he first approached her on the landing zone. "Staff Sergeant," Brennan said. He had rehearsed nothing. He had no prepared speech. He had only the truth, and it was harder to speak than any words he had ever uttered. "I owe you an apology." Elena said nothing. She watched him with those steady eyes that had tracked targets at impossible distances. "Not just for the mission," Brennan continued. "For everything before it. The way I treated you. The things I said. The way I let others treat you." He paused, forcing himself to hold her gaze. "You warned us about those positions. You saw it coming. And I ignored you because I had already decided you did not belong here. That decision almost got my people killed. It did get one of them shot." Elena remained silent for a moment longer. Then she spoke, her voice carrying no triumph, no vindication. "Kowalski, how is he?" "Surgery went well," Brennan said. "He will live. Probably will not operate again, but he will live." Elena nodded once. Good. She did not accept his apology. She did not reject it either. She simply acknowledged it the way she acknowledged all facts, with quiet assessment and no unnecessary words. Brennan understood. Forgiveness was not something he could ask for. It was something he would have to earn, over time, through actions rather than words. He had spent 3 days proving he did not deserve her trust. Rebuilding that trust would take far longer. For what it is worth, he said, turning to leave. Razor-Falcon is one hell of a call sign. He walked away before she could respond. Behind him, Elena watched him go, then closed the door and returned to her preparations for whatever mission would come next. 3 days after Operation Talon Strike, FOB Thunder held a formation on the dusty parade ground between the Tactical Operations Center and the motor pool. The entire base complement stood in ranks under the Afghan sun, their shadows stretching long across the gravel as the morning light climbed over the eastern mountains. Elena stood at attention in the front row, her dress uniform pressed sharp despite the heat. She had not asked for this ceremony. She had not wanted it. But the military had its rituals, and some recognitions could not be declined. The FOB commander, Colonel Marcus Webb Sr., stepped forward with a small blue case in his hands. His voice carried across the formation as he read from the citation. For extraordinary heroism in connection with combat operations against the enemy, Staff Sergeant Elena Vance, while serving as attached sniper with SEAL Team 7 during Operation Talon Strike, demonstrated exceptional valor under fire. When friendly forces came under attack from a concealed enemy sniper position, Staff Sergeant Vance accurately engaged and neutralized 7 enemy combatants at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, including a confirmed kill at 2,617 meters. Her actions directly saved the lives of multiple American service members and enabled the successful extraction of a critically wounded teammate. Staff Sergeant Vance's courage, composure, and extraordinary marksmanship reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Marine Corps. The colonel opened the case and removed the Bronze Star with its Combat V device. He pinned it to Elena's uniform with practiced efficiency, then stepped back and saluted. Elena returned the salute. "Thank you, sir." 2 words, nothing more. The formation was dismissed. The ranks broke apart into clusters of conversation and movement. Elena remained where she stood as a stream of people approached to shake her hand. Marines she had never met, soldiers from other units, support personnel who had heard the story spreading through the FOB like wildfire. She accepted each handshake with the same neutral expression, the same brief nod of acknowledgement. Webb found her after the crowd had thinned. He looked different than he had 3 days ago, less uncertain, as if the act of writing his statement had clarified something inside him. "Congratulations, Staff Sergeant," he said. Elena glanced at him. "You wrote that statement Torres asked for." It was not a question. Webb nodded anyway. Every detail I could remember, from the helicopter to the extraction. "Why?" Webb considered the question. "Because it was the truth, and because you told me it mattered. Not to punish anyone, just so it does not happen to the next woman who gets attached to a unit that does not want her." He paused. "I remembered what you said." Elena studied him for a moment, then offered a small nod. Something that might have been approval flickered briefly across her features. "Thank you, petty officer." She walked away before he could respond, heading toward the chow hall as if the medal ceremony had been just another item on her daily schedule. Webb watched her go, still trying to reconcile the quiet woman in the pressed uniform with the lethal precision he had witnessed on that mountainside. That evening, Reyes found Elena at the base rifle range. She was running through dry-fire drills, her rifle shouldered and aimed at targets that existed only in her mind. He stood at the entrance for a full minute before she acknowledged his presence. "Staff Sergeant," he said. "Got a minute?" Elena lowered her rifle and turned to face him. Reyes looked uncomfortable, his usual confidence stripped away by something that resembled shame. "I've been thinking about the mission," he said, "about how I set up my overwatch position." He swallowed hard. "You were right. The eastern approach was completely exposed. I should have seen it. I should have adjusted when you raised the concern." Elena said nothing. She waited. Reyes continued. I have been doing this for 6 years. I thought I knew everything there was to know about setting up a position. He met her eyes. I was wondering if you would walk me through your range estimation techniques for extreme distance shooting, the stuff you did out there. Elena considered him for a long moment. The request was genuine. She could see in his posture, hear it in his voice. This was not a man looking to save face. This was a professional recognizing a gap in his own capabilities and asking for help to fill it. Tomorrow, she said. 0600. Bring your rifle and a notebook. Reyes nodded, relief visible in his expression. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. He left without another word. Elena returned to her dry-fire drills, running through the motions that had become as natural as breathing. The next morning, she received new orders. Her attachment to SEAL Team 7 had been extended through the end of their deployment cycle. Lieutenant Commander Chun had personally requested the extension. The documentation listed her as primary overwatch for all future operations. She read the orders twice, then filed them away and began preparing her gear. That afternoon, she was summoned to the medical bay. Kowalski was being prepared for medevac to Landstuhl, the military hospital in Germany, where he would undergo reconstructive surgery on his shoulder. He had asked to see her before he left. She found him on a stretcher near the helicopter pad, his arm immobilized, his face pale but alert. The pain medication had taken the edge off, but his eyes were clear as they found hers. Staff Sergeant, he said. His voice was weaker than she remembered. Petty officer. She stopped beside his stretcher, looking down at the man whose life she had helped save. They told me what you did out there. Kowalski's good hand reached up, found hers, gripped it briefly. 2,600 meters. He shook his head slightly. I would be dead without you. The whole team might be dead without you. Elena did not pull away from his grip. You would have done the same for any of us. Kowalski managed a weak smile. Maybe, but I did not have to. You were there. He released her hand as the medical team approached to load him onto the helicopter. Thank you, Razor-Falcon. Elena watched them carry him away. The Black Hawk lifted off in a storm of dust, banked south toward Bagram, and disappeared over the mountains. She stood on the landing pad until the sound of rotors faded to nothing. Then she turned and walked back toward the range, where Reyes was waiting with his rifle and notebook, ready to learn what she had to teach. 2 months later, the official verification arrived from Quantico. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School had reviewed Elena's shot data, cross-referenced it with ballistic analysis and terrain mapping, and confirmed what everyone who had been there already knew. Her kill at 2,617 meters stood as the third longest confirmed combat sniper shot in United States military history. Her name would be entered into the training materials as a case study in extreme-range marksmanship under combat conditions. Elena read the notification in her quarters at Camp Pendleton, 3 weeks after returning from deployment. She folded the paper, placed it in her footlocker with her other service documents, and went to the rifle range for her afternoon training session. Across the country, in a briefing room at Joint Special Operations Command, Senior Chief Kyle Brennan sat through his pre-deployment orientation for his next assignment. The letter of reprimand sat in his service record like a stone in his shoe, a permanent reminder of the lesson he had learned in the mountains of Afghanistan. When the briefing officer asked if there were any special requests for attached personnel, Brennan raised his hand. He asked that any available qualified female operators be considered for integration with his element. The officer looked surprised, but noted the request without comment. Brennan did not explain his reasons. He did not need to. The men who had served with him on Operation Talon Strike knew the story. It had spread through the special operations community like all good stories do, passed from team room to team room, growing slightly with each telling but never straying far from the truth. The truth was remarkable enough. At a naval station in San Diego, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb stood at attention during his promotion ceremony. The Master Chief, pinning his new insignia, asked the traditional question, what was the most memorable experience of his career so far? Webb told the story. He described watching a Marine Staff Sergeant take a shot at over 2,600 meters while SEALs who had mocked her were pinned down and dying in a village below. He described the silence afterward, the stunned disbelief, the way everything they thought they knew about her had shattered in a single trigger pull. The room went quiet. The Master Chief nodded slowly and moved on to the next promotion, but Webb saw the way the junior sailors looked at him afterward. They wanted to know more. They wanted to hear the whole story. He told it to anyone who asked. He would keep telling it for the rest of his career. At Camp Pendleton, Elena completed her afternoon training session and walked back toward the Scout Sniper Schoolhouse. A class of new candidates was running drills on the adjacent range, their movements uncertain, their groupings scattered. She remembered being where they were years ago, before Helmand, before Afghanistan, before she had learned what it meant to take a life at distances most people could not comprehend. One of the candidates broke from the group and jogged toward her. A young woman, barely 22, with the hungry look of someone desperate to prove herself. Staff Sergeant Vance, the candidate said. Her voice carried the nervous energy of someone approaching a legend. I was hoping to ask you something. Elena stopped. Go ahead. The candidate hesitated, then pushed forward. Is it true what they say about female snipers in combat? That we have to be twice as good just to be considered half as capable? That the men will never really accept us no matter what we do? Elena studied her for a long moment. The question was familiar. She had asked it herself once, years ago, to a gunnery sergeant who had given her an answer she still remembered. What matters, Elena said, is what you do when lives depend on you. Not what they say about you before. Not what they think about you after. Just what you do in the moment when everything is on the line and you're the only one who can make the shot. The candidate absorbed this in silence. Elena reached out and adjusted the young woman's grip on her rifle, correcting a slight misalignment in her trigger finger placement. She guided her breathing with a few quiet words, the same techniques she had taught Reyes on that dusty range in Afghanistan. Train harder than anyone else, Elena said. Know your weapon better than you know yourself. And when the time comes, do not hesitate. She released the candidate's hand and stepped back. Nothing else counts. The young woman nodded, her expression shifting from uncertainty to determination. She returned to her training group with straighter shoulders and steadier hands. Elena watched her go, then continued toward the schoolhouse. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere out there another woman was being told she did not belong. Another woman was being mocked for her ambitions, dismissed for her gender, underestimated by men who had never seen what she could do. Elena could not help all of them. She could not fight every battle or change every mind, but she could do what she had always done: show up, do the work, and let her actions speak louder than their doubts. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever walked into a room where no one expected you to succeed, where they had already decided you did not belong before you even opened your mouth? And did you prove them wrong? Not with arguments or explanations, with actions, with results that could not be denied. Tell me about it in the comments. Share the moment when you showed someone what you were really capable of. Because somewhere right now, another Razor-Falcon is being told she cannot do it. Another person is being dismissed before they have had the chance to prove themselves. And they are about to prove everyone wrong. Elena Vance entered the schoolhouse and began preparing for the next day's training. The medal was in her footlocker. The record was in the books. The story was spreading through the ranks like wildfire. But for her, it was just another day. Another opportunity to be ready. Another chance to prove that the only thing that mattered was what you did when everything was on the line. Razor-Falcon had earned her call, signed twice now, and she would keep earning it every day for as long as she wore the uniform.